Live. Welcome to those of you who are joining us on Facebook today. We're glad you took the time out of your Saturday to join us. We hope that you'll join us sometime in person here on 40 Bowtell Street. Our services start at 10 a.m. with a time of worship, and then we get right into the Word at 11 o'clock. So we are going to continue on a journey. We are always continuing on a journey. We kind of started, before Passover, really. But it's we're living in exciting times. There's a lot going on in the world, and in case you haven't noticed, everything is really heightened. There's it's like when we read the scriptures about the creation itself groans and travails under the weight of sin, and it's crying out for the manifestation of the sons of God. It's the time we're living in now. I mean, there's more and more, even just natural occurrences on the earth that are not natural, that are not the norm. We're not in normal times, not at all. But they are exciting times for those of us in the household of faith. Because in the household of faith, everything is going to be all right. We know that. It's going to be more than all right. It's going to be very good. Because we're on the right side of the line. Amen. So we've been on this journey, like I said, since before Passover. It's like there's a certain dispensation and a time we've stepped into. That's a heightened time. It's a supernatural time. It's a time when there's an elevation in the spirit. There's like a specific resource, there's a word I'm looking for. There's a specific flavor for this season. There's a specific thing that Yahweh wants released into the atmosphere in this season. Specific words, specific utterances that will set the course for the future. We're in that time period of around the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, that time. And it kind of parallels where we are in our own spiritual journey. And, how many of you know that what's written in this word is not just stories for us to read, but it's things that we are supposed to direct our lives by. It's supposed to be, give us answers, give us clues, give us direction for our life, what to do, what not to do. It's supposed to be a pattern for us to follow. And so many things that are patterned in the Word, you find they start playing out in modern times. So it's like, how many times we talk about like the 9th of Av, for example. You see that the destruction of the temple occurred. Well, first the sin of the 10 spies occurred then, and then the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the second temple. Is it a coincidence that all those things occurred on the same date? It's like there's a stamp in time on that specific date. And certain seasons have the stamp on it. You can sense when you change a season. I think it's Lynn Hammond that talks about when you change a season, you have to know to dress for the season. So like when we cross over, here we are crossing over from winter into spring, and sometimes it can be a little different in New England because it's like, okay, it's summer. No, it's still winter. No, now it's spring. Now it's back to winter. Now it's spring, and you kind of go through this period of time where you're not quite sure how to dress, right? In other parts of the country are not so much, as they have like the more defined seasons. Like, okay, now we're from winter into spring. But there comes a time when you have to put away your old clothes. You have to put away the clothes of the former season. Like, if you're walking around in July with a heavy winter coat on, it's not going to benefit you very much. You're going to be uncomfortable because you're not dressed for the season. So when we step over into these new seasons in the realm of the Spirit, Yahweh has certain resources, certain apparel for us to wear for that season, right? And you start noticing there's a shift in the current of even things that you're hearing, what people are talking about, and it's for a purpose. And you start finding out that all these different streams of various parts of the body are coming together and shifting toward one course. I mean, I don't know how many people I heard after last Sabbath's message. From that point through this last week, I don't know how many people started talking about pride. I don't know how many people started talking about, what you say in things that we were specifically talking about last week. And it's like, that's not a coincidence. It's because we're in a time that requires this. This is a word for the time. This is a word for the hour. And so having said that, I think we had talked a few weeks ago about we're going to start making a lot of Rosh Chodesh. Because that's a stamp in time that Yahweh has set. He said the moon is to mark seasons for you and months and years. And he said for us to pay attention to that. There was new moon celebrations that occurred all throughout the Bible. And it says even in the end times, from new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath, everybody will be going up to worship the Lord. So if he counts it as a significant thing, then we should count it as a significant thing too, amen? So when we talk about coming over, it seems like we just crossed over into the month of Nisan. But we're already approaching the month of Iyar this week. So we wanted to start talking about that. I believe it's first of Iyar is on Tuesday, Monday night into Tuesday. We wanted to kind of talk about that because there is a significance in this Hebrew month. And what a lot of people can look at it and say, well, that's just mystical. That's just, I don't know, it kind of almost steps into the Kabbalah type, weirdness. But while some people can take it and kind of almost twist it into weirdness, if Yahweh has a set mark in that time, we need to find out what that is so we can get in alignment with him, right? So we wanted to start talking about that.
So I'm going to read you a couple articles that we found on the month of Iyar. And just a very, very interesting month, like Jordan was talking about. When you look into the different aspects of it and characteristics and stuff, and you'll see some of this in some of the articles that I read and I'm going to read. But just to highlight a couple of the key points of it. So the month of Iyar is about introspection and self-refinement. It's about awareness, self-awareness. How interesting that's what we've been talking about over these last few weeks. And what we discussed on Sabbath about, being aware that things that are happening, the sin and stuff, all comes back down to pride. All the curses are hanging off of that. The sins are all hanging off of that. And then, like on Tuesday night, we were talking about a Bible study, about redeeming the time and making the most of every opportunity. Interesting, you're going to hear in some of the stuff that we're talking about that all resurfaces. Mm-hmm. So the month of introspection and self-refinement. And just take careful note of, like Jordan was saying, Yahweh does things for a reason. Nothing is ever by accident. It's not a coincidence. This month of Iyar was meant to be at this time for a reason. And you look at how he's placed all the feasts and stuff and how it's just this cycle that we go around the cycle all the time, but every time we go around the cycle, it's a higher and higher and higher elevation of the cycle. And all the things start to connect and all the months start to flow, and you see how the months connect with all the feasts. And you don't realize that until you really start to dive into it. So I'm going to start with this first article about Iyar, calling a month anticipating revelation. Because what is it bringing us up to? It's going to be bringing us up to Shavuot. And so from this time until up to the time of Shavuot, we've got this period of time, these days, like I said, to continue on with the introspection and the self-refinement and the shifting and the changing. We were talking last night about we didn't go this way, but a title for it. And it was like, oh, well, how about a time for change? That's not our title, but it was like, a time for change, because this is what this is. It's a time for change. And we've said that so many times before. It's a time for change, but it's different now. It's a time for permanent change. It's a time from this month is, and we'll get more into this, but this month is also a month of passage. It's a month of crossing over. So it's a time for change. It's a time to get rid of everything that was behind us and to take on everything that's ahead of us, all that is new. So the first article I'm going to read you is called A Month Anticipating Revelation. So the second month of the traditional Jewish calendar is called Iyar. In the Torah, this month is simply called the second month, though later it was called Ziv, a Canaanite loanword that means glow or blossom, perhaps suggesting the growing season of early spring. The word Ziv may be related to the word Zuv, meaning a flow or gush of fluid. Like most other Hebrew months, the name was later changed sometime after the Babylonian captivity. Iyar usually falls in April through May on the Gregorian calendar. The month always lasts 29 days, and Rosh Chodesh is therefore observed for 2 days. It was during this month that those who were unable to observe Passover were allowed to celebrate a second Passover exactly 30 days later on IR 1415. And we're going to say a little bit more of that later on. But if you remember, it was last year when Mom talked about, a second Passover. For those that didn't have a chance to get it right through the first one, it's the only feast that does that is Passover. And you get a second chance to do it again.
If for some reason you were unclean, or for some reason you weren't able to keep the first Passover, it gives you a second chance. Isn't that just awesome?
So on the Torah's calendar, the month of Iyar falls between the great month of redemption, which was Nisan, and the great month of revelation, which is Sivan. So we're going from redemption to revelation, okay? And is
That's the title of our message.
That's the title of our message. Yeah, that's right. It's actually the title of our message.
From redemption to
From
revelation.
redeemed to revealed.
That's right.
All right. So, and is therefore primarily commemorated as a month of passage leading up to the awesome revelation given at Sinai. Later, the agricultural aspect of this passage was enshrined in terms of Sephirat HaOmer, or the counting of the sheaves, when a sheaf of barley was waved before the altar each day for 49 days before the arrival of the holiday of Shavuot. Indeed, rabbinical traditions associate each passing day of the month of Iyar with a heightened spiritual status wherein a different level of impurity is purged from the soul. There's another key word. You keep an eye on that one because we're also going to be going somewhere with that too, with purging. Thereby implying that the Israelites' journey from Egypt to Sinai represented a spiritual transformation. And that's what this is all about. It's about a spiritual transformation. Recall that exactly 1 month after the Exodus, God led the Israelites from the oasis and palm trees at Elim into the deeper part of the desert, to Midbar Sin, a desolate region that was about midway to Sinai going southeast. About this time, the food provisions the people had brought with them ran out, and the Israelites began grumbling against Moses and Aaron, saying, "If only we had died by the hand of God in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to our fill, for you have brought us into this desert to starve to death." God then said to Moses, "Look, I am going to rain down bread from heaven for you. The people will go out and gather a portion for that day so that I might test whether they will walk in my Torah or not." Each Friday, the people received a double portion that was to last them through Shabbat. And the test centered on whether the people would refrain from seeking manna on God's appointed day of rest. Note that the 10 Commandments had not yet been given to Israel at this time, so it is likely that the law of manna was meant to prepare them for the law of the Sabbath that would be given at Sinai the following month. According to Jewish tradition, it was also during the month of Iyar that the well of Miriam began to flow to provide fresh water for the people. The war with Amalek, Israel's first national enemy, also took place during the month of Iyar, just before the revelation was given at Sinai.
There's always a war before revelation. You notice that? The enemy always tries to attack to disrupt the plan of God when he's going to reveal something.
It was also during the month of Iyar, during the second year after the Exodus, that the Israelites began their travels through the desert with a newly completed Mishkan in their midst, tabernacle. The Torah relates that it was on Iyar 1 that the first census of the Jewish people was taken, so that each person could find his or her place in the fourfold formation of tribes that made up the camp of Israel that surrounded the tabernacle in the desert. In other words, Iyar represented the first month that the Shekinah glory began leading the tribes to the promised land of Zion. This was prophetic, of course, since the scriptures later reveal that it was during the same month that King Solomon began to build the holy temple to Jerusalem. And we're going to expound on that. That showed the important things biblically that took place through this month of Iyar. And we're going to expound more so on it. Do you want me to get into that, or did you want to add something else? Okay. So, by considering the historical events of Iyar, we began to get a picture of the splendor of this month Not only does the sun's light shine with increasing intensity during this month, but also God's splendor has shone with increasing intensity. Moses and Aaron took the first census of the tribes of Israel on the first day of Iyar. This first step led to the organizing of the tribes around the Mishkan. Then on the 20th of Iyar, when the tribes had been instructed regarding their encampments, the Shekinah glory lifted from the Mishkan, signaling the Israelites to break camp and follow the cloud. What once terrified the nation at Sinai now dwelt in the middle of their encampments. Throughout their wilderness journeys, Israel brought sacrifices to the altar and worshiped in God's presence. The Iyar connection continues in the subsequent stages of Israelite worship. 479 years after the construction of the Mishkan, King Solomon began the construction of the temple. Now, this is going over some things, but it's going into more detail of it. Several hundred years later, Zerubbabel also began construction on the second temple in the month of Iyar. Both occasions were times of increased splendor for the people of God. During these periods of construction, Israel rejoiced at the prospect of building the house of God and worshiping there. In the first century CE, Israel saw yet another increased amount of splendor, though one very different from previous generations. During the Iyar of approximately 30 CE, Israel witnessed the resurrected glory of Yeshua. For 40 days after his resurrection, the Master appeared in Jerusalem and Israel. Many came to believe in him during this period, including his brother Yaakov the righteous. On the 26th of Iyar, he ascended to the heavenly Mishkan of his father.
So you catch that. You know, we talked about Passover, and that's when Yeshua died, and then 3 days later he was resurrected. But then throughout this month, he made many appearances to the disciples. And he was teaching during this whole period of time. We don't have recorded what he was teaching, other than he was teaching the kingdom of heaven. You know, so it's during this time that he was revealing himself, before the day at the upper room. You see that? There's these moments that mark throughout the month. He's revealing things to them before Holy Spirit comes and indwells them.
In our day, Iyar calls to mind the promise of our Master's imminent return. Just as God's splendor increased for Israel during Iyar, so too on that great day, God's indwelling, God's dwelling will be with man, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor to him. We will draw near to God and behold his inexpressible splendor. So there's all these different things that are wrapped up just around in this month of Iyar. You know, and all the months have a significance. They all have something wrapped up in them. But certain months have more so of a depth to them and more of an intensity of specific things that are supposed to take place. So I'm going to read one more article that kind of really gets into more of the description of things that I just read on these previous ones. Some of them repeat, but the purpose of repeating them is because each one had a little bit different flavor of the event that took place, and so the insights were a little bit more different, and gives you more of a broad range of how the connection of what everything is supposed to be. So shortly after the Exodus, the Israelites reached a well of bitter water. Moses cast a tree branch into the water, and it miraculously became sweet. God then promised that if Israel followed his ways, and this was in Exodus, the diseases I have placed on Egypt, I will not place upon you, for I am God your healer. The acronym for this last phrase spells out the name of the month of Iyar. Now think of that last phrase, for I am God your healer. In the real translation, obviously says, for I am Yahweh your healer. So with an I am Yahweh your healer, that acronym spells out the month of Iyar, thus indicating that Iyar is a time for healing. So this month, you know, we're talking about how it's a month of introspection and self-refinement. It's a month for redeeming the time. This is a month for healing. And like I said, the different months have different things in them, but each thing is for a specific time, and it's got a purpose. So like with this month, healing's always available. Okay, we always have healing. It's always available. It's already been done. But there's a little bit more of an enhancement on it during this month. A little bit more of the supernatural, miraculous of Yahweh. in this month of IR. And even though, like I said, it's always available to us, it's already been done, we've already been healed. Okay, that's what the word says. By his stripes we are healed. Well, if we are healed, then we were healed. If we were healed, we are healed. I said that backwards. But with this month, it has a little bit more of a, I don't know, anointing on it, a little bit more of a, I guess it would be anointing.
It's like the month of Elul when we talk about the king is in the field. Well, we know that Yahweh is always present with us, but there's a heightenedness to his being present with us in our everyday life. So this is a month that it's like, we always know that Yahweh Rapha, the Lord is the one who heals us, but there's a heightenedness, like she was saying, to that aspect.
So, IR being a time for healing. Although IR does not contain many special days, every single day of the month is included in the Sefirat HaOmer counting, the mitzvah to count each of the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot. Sefirat HaOmer is a period of introspection and self-refinement as we prepare ourselves to receive the Torah anew on Shavuot. Each day of IR represents another step in the spiritual journey towards Sinai. Actually, I just want to add something on that part. When Jordan and I were talking and stuff, and it came to us about, we're on this spiritual journey, and we're going from Passover to Shavuot. And we're talking about how it's a month of passage. And the title of this article actually was, it had something to do about being a bridge month or something like that. It's a bridge month. And that's when Jordan and I started talking, it was like, and we just said at the beginning, it's a time from being redeemed to being revealed. It's a time from where you're redeemed from the old. So think about it. We came through Passover, and we talked about the cup of redemption, the cup of restoration, all the different cup of sanctification, all the different cups that we talked about. But now we're coming over into, we're now entering into the journey and the passageway of coming to Shavuot. And we're coming from being redeemed to being revealed. So when we were talking about that, it was like, we were redeemed. Okay, we came through Passover and did all that, and we've been redeemed from old ways of thinking, been redeemed from sin, redeemed from habits, redeemed from the old, and now we're coming in to be being revealed to who we really are, the new us, without all of that old stuff. So from being redeemed to being revealed, revealing who we truly are, who he has truly made us to become.
And that goes along with, do you have the thing on the tribe of the month?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in this part of the article. All right, so anyways, to continue on the article. The first day of IR, and this is what we were just talking about. Actually, I'm going to skip over that because it's kind of the same thing. We were talking about how it's the second Passover. You get that chance again. The Torah describes how God created this holiday at the request of those who, for reasons beyond their control, or for, like Jordan was saying, for who was unclean, were unable to offer the sacrifice in its proper time. 1 month later, they were giving a second chance. Now, doesn't that sound like Yahweh? That is exactly who Yahweh is, the God of chances. Pesach Shenai reminds us that it's never too late. With sincere effort, yesterday's missed opportunity can become today's achievement. And that's stuff that we've been talking about, Things that we may have missed in the past that we wish, like we had said, if you ever wish you could go back and say this differently, do you ever wish you could go back and just do that differently? If I had known back then what I know now, back then would have been so different. Choices would have been different. My journey would have been different. Things just would have been different. And so yesterday's missed opportunity can become today's achievement. And I just thought that was very, very, very powerful. So, IR. God's eyes is always upon us to bring about healing. But first our spirit, then soul, then body. IR is referred to as the month of radiance or budding, like when a flower buds, There are several reasons for this, and the more we look at this, then the more we look at it, we'll see what this actually means. And we just talked about this. When the Hebrews arrived at Marah, they discovered that the only accessible water was bitter. Moshe was instructed to throw a tree into the water, which miraculously made the water sweet. Already fully aware that God controls nature from the miracles that were still fresh in our memories, what did experiencing yet another miracle add to our repertoire? The manna that fell from heaven and stayed the Hebrews in the desert for 40 years began to fall on the 15th of Iyar. It was the season when God showed himself strong on behalf of Israel in the wilderness by healing the bitter waters. And we just talked about this. God said to Moses, I not only will heal the water, I will heal the people. For I am the Lord who heals you. I am Yahweh Rapha. On the first day of Iyar, King Solomon began the construction of the first temple. On the exact same day, hundreds of years later, Ezra began the construction of the second temple. On the first day of Iyar, following the Exodus, the 30 Israelites reached the well of bitter water. We already talked about that. I'm not going to actually do that part over again. And we reminds them that I am Lord your healer, and this is the month of healing. During the month of Iyar following the Exodus, the manna which fed the Israelites for 40 years during their sojourn in the desert began to fall from heaven. Issachar is the scholarly tribe of Israel.
This is the tribe for the month. The tribe of Issachar is the tribe for this month.
Iyar.
How many times have we heard about the tribe of Issachar in this congregation? I mean, that's been like a highlight that Mom has had for this congregation, where the tribe of Issachar. Yes, Mary Frances talked about the tribe of Issachar. So that's the tribe for this month, is the tribe of Issachar.
So the Sanhedrin was mostly composed from the tribe of Issachar. In particular, Issachar was the master of the secret of the Jewish calendar, as is said of him, knowers of understanding the times. How many times have Mom said that? That's who we're called to be. We know the times we've come into, and we know what to do in those times. His basic nature is contemplative, and he serves as the advisor to his brethren, the tribes of Israel, in particular to the king Judah. Issachar is one of the 12 tribes of Israel that in biblical times constituted the people of Israel, who later became the Jewish people. The tribe was named after the fifth son born to Jacob and his first wife Leah. After the death of Moses, Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land and apportioned the territory among the 12 tribes. The tribe of Issachar settled on land lying west of the Jordan River and southeast of the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. While Issachar was in alignment with the scriptures, they reaped the benefits of the land, sucking the abundance of the seas. The Jordan River was their eastern border, and treasures hid in the sand showing the agricultural wealth that the land possessed. At the time David was anointed king, the men of Issachar came to him. 1 Chronicles 12:22 through 32 says, they came to David day by day to help him, sons of Issachar who understood the times of what Israel ought to do. When David assembled his enemy, men came to him for help. When David assembled his army, men came to him for help, but only Issachar understood the times. That is the kind of people we are supposed to be today, to allow God to use us accordingly. We are to be like the men of Issachar. Issachar was linked to prosperity, intercession, and blessing. After the death of King Solomon, Issachar was one of the 10 northern tribes that established the independent kingdom of Israel that survived until the Assyrian conquest of 721 BC. These 10 tribes, partially dispersed to other regions, eventually lost their identity and became known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. 1 Chronicles 12:32 says, and of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. Issachar would assist with the calling and gathering of Israel for times of worship, sacrifice, war, and praise. Being able to read the heavens, knowledge of moon cycles, and solar time was vital. Iyar is the month where he revealed the secrets of the covenant. Daniel 2:21 through 22 shows us that he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of the Lord, and it will be given to him. Of the 200 heads of the men of Issachar who came to David at Hebron, it is said that they were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. According to the Targum, this meant that they knew how to ascertain the periods of the sun and moon, the intercalation of months, the dates of solemn feasts, and could interpret the signs of the times. A company from Issachar came to the celebration of the Passover when it was restored by Hezekiah. Issachar has a portion assigned to him in Ezekiel's ideal division of the land, and he appears also in the list in Revelation 7:7. Do they come back to be part of the redeemed? After this, and this is where it ends, after this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind could blow on earth or sea or against any tree. That is all wrapped up within the tribe of Issachar and in this month of Iyar. And when you listen to those characteristics of the tribe of Issachar and how Mom has referred to us as the Issachar, you got to pick up on that. You know, we may be a small camp of influence in the natural, but we have done some mighty, mighty damage to the kingdom of hell. Mm-hmm. Okay, for such a small camp of influence, we've had a mighty, mighty voice, not just in this city, but we've had a voice throughout the state, throughout this country. We've had a voice throughout all other nations, okay? We go places and people are like, oh, we know you, you know, that type of thing. And we've had such an impact in Branson, in Haiti, in Israel, and places that we have traveled, different events that we've gone throughout Massachusetts and everything, you know, New England and stuff. If this small camp of influence, but so to speak, all eyes have been on us, okay? And, you know,
even if it's just been 1 or 2 of us that have gone to a place, it's like we represent the whole congregation. So when they see us, it's like, you're the congregation at Faith Christian Church in Fitchburg. So it's like, it's a mark. There's like a mark that we have made in the spirit realm.
You know, just like, you know, even something as like with our YouTube videos, you know, find out that people are watching us in Russia on YouTube. They're watching us on, was the Philippines, I think it was another one on YouTube. You know, different places throughout the nation and stuff. You know, who would have thought, really, who would have thought this tiny little congregation in Fitchburg, Mass, where a lot of people don't even know what Fitchburg, Mass is, you know, and people in Russia are watching. You know, people in the Philippines are watching. Who knows where else people are watching? We just don't know about it yet, you know. But, you know, to just keep that in mind about us being the tribe of Issachar and the month they're in. You know, there was something that, I don't recall the name of it now. What was that thing we were talking about? The Lag
BaOmer?
Lag BaOmer. Yeah. You know, there's a thing, and it didn't print out. But when I was reading that article and stuff, and it was kind of interesting, you know, we see the time that we're in right now. And we have a nation that's been coming through, you know, a virus and things with government, the elections and all that and stuff. And wrapped up in this article, things that took place in the month of Iyar, you know, it was a popular rabbi, I don't recall his name right now, but he was the author of some well-known book. And he had many students underneath him.
It's Rabbi Akiva.
Was it Rabbi Akiva?
It's Rabbi Akiva, yeah.
So, I mean, he had thousands and thousands and thousands of students under him, thousands of students under him. Well, I don't recall what the year was, but when he had passed on, he had told his students that when he passes on, mark that as a date, an anniversary every year. And it took place in the month of Iyar where he passed on, to be a joyous time, to be that's the one day where it's a joyous celebration. Well, interesting. So he was talking about that. Well, his students, it was his very students, that at some period, I believe after that, I think it was after that, a plague had hit. And they were dealing with this plague for a long period of time. 24,000 of his students died from this plague. 24,000 students died from this plague. Mm-hmm. But the day came, and it was in the day of Iyar, which was the anniversary of his death. On that day, the plague ceased.
And he had
It
said
just
to mark that day
stopped.
as a day of rejoicing. The day of
Yep.
his death, he said, I want you to memorialize this as a day of joy and rejoicing. Like we talk about the celebration of life, not
Yep.
mourning of the death.
So when that day came on his anniversary, that plague that had been very prominent, 24,000 of his students had died so far. On that day, all of a sudden, the plague just ceased. I mean, it stopped. It was gone. Just poof. Okay. And what have we been hearing, have heard and stuff about the month that we're in, the time that we're in now here with Passover and stuff like that, and what can happen with the plague that this nation has been facing. Okay? Just like then, okay? It just ceased on that day. Okay? Well, come on, who caused it to cease on that day, okay? He's the God of the same. He's always been the same, yesterday, today, and forever. Okay, he does not change. Why can't it be that all of a sudden, and there's been things that have come forth to that on a specific day, that day that could come up on his anniversary.
Brother Copeland prophesied.
Okay?
Brother Copeland
did.
prophesied that back at the beginning last year. Remember, Dad did that whole message where he was reading the different prophecies that had to do with the plague coming on the land, and then suddenly, like, it will vanish. It will just vanish as quickly as it started. And then Brother Copeland's prophecy about it will be gone before your eyes and all that. We heard those prophecies. Dad read them. They're still true. We got to hold on to that.
So in the month of Iyar, that plague could just cease. Just poof, be no more.
Wouldn't that be appropriate? This is the month where he is the Lord who heals you.
Yahweh Rapha.
It's like in an instant the waters are healed. In an instant. The plague stopped.
And what did he say in that article? I healed the waters. As soon as that action took place, boom, he healed the waters.
And in the Bible, what do the waters represent? They represent life. They represent humanity. When you see, like, I saw a sea of waters, it was people. So when he healed the waters, he healed the people. You see that?
Instantly.
Yeah.
It just ceased.
That's right.
That's who our Yahweh is. Just cease. Things can just stop like that. I heard somebody talking, I don't know if it was this past week or something, all these the prophecies that Hank Kuhlman has been talking about, Pastor Hank, and the winds, okay? And we've been having some winds, okay? I don't know about you, but I think we've had more winds lately than we've had previously. It's been like, what? And they're not just a gentle breeze. There have been these forceful winds, but they're like, they're a different wind though, but they've been forceful winds. It was like, okay,
there's one here, I think it was last week or something. I went to go out the front door of the church, and the wind just blew the door open and took me with it.
Well, it just been different. I was just going to say, because during one of those wind time things, Azraeli and I were coming home, and she gotten out of the car, and I was walking ahead of her, and a gust came by, and I turned around like, where'd you go? Well, it actually knocked her over, and I'm like, what are you doing on the ground? And it was like, because it was so strong, and it caught her off guard, and she's little, she's a lightweight feather, like 40 pounds, and that's never happened to her before. She's usually pretty good, walking, but it's like this certain wind, and it was just like, she was behind me. I turned around, and, oh, she's gone. No, I'm good, Mom, I'm good, and it was like, but there have been different types of winds. But so these winds, and then now the thing about, well, it started actually with snow. Okay,
yes,
it started with snow.
We had plenty of that.
And we were having all the snow and stuff, but then the winds, and now the rains. Okay, so now there's supposed to be there's going to be these rains coming. Okay, abundance of rain. Only if they don't come in two certain times of May, we're all set.
I saw a cloud the size of a hand, and I heard the abundance of rain. Sounds like these are the days of Elijah. We say about that. The days of Elijah, the days of Elisha.
But I heard a thing the other day, and I don't recall where I heard it right now, but they were talking about the winds and the rains. And this is all wrapped up in the month of Iyar, okay? And in the month we just came out of. It's from Passover to Shavuot. It's that time period.
Bridge.
It's that bridge. It's from the old to the new. It's from redeeming to revelation. It's from, destroying sin to walking anew to things.
Time of the former rain.
But there was this thing about talking about the winds and the rain blowing and washing the virus away like that. And it was like
cleansing.
It's a cleansing. But in the month of Iyar, just like with this story with that rabbi and his students, how it just ceased. Just boom, one moment was there, one moment was completely gone.
Yep.
Okay, and that's who God is. But with the winds and the rains, winds blowing things away, the rain washing things away.
That's right.
Just like that. Just like, how quick like can a wind just take something and before you know it's gone. It happened to me actually on the first windstorm. I was going to go put things in a recycle bin and I wasn't thinking. And so I went and I put a can on top of the recycle bin and my washing machine went off. So I turned around to go get the load in the washing machine and I came back to see my can going across the yard. And then I was like, forget it. By the time I was trying to run out, it was already into the woods and stuff and I actually lost sight of it. I mean, it was gone. So it's just like, okay, well, there went my can. Kind of like my daughter. There she went. She's gone. But it was like, but that's the type of winds. Just like I said, that can was, I don't even know where it ended up. I said to Scott, I hope it didn't end up in our next door neighbor's front door or something. But it was just like disappeared. And that was what the intent of the wind was to do, was just to blow it away and cause it to be gone like that can forever, okay?
Think of a story that we had read. I think actually we watched it. It was on the Against All Odds movie when it was talking about the winds that came and blew across the minefield and exposed all the mines. Sometimes that wind needs to blow off the surface to expose what's beneath it so that you're not caught in a trap, right?
Exactly. So that was the month of Iyar.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any more that you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, when we're talking about it being a time of cleansing and like a time of introspection and all that, I was thinking of the fact that cleansing is more, like you can wash your hands, but if you're cleansing, it goes more than just surface. Like it's like we were talking about in the beginning about being purged, and it's a time of actually like completely washing everything out. But what is the purpose? Why would that be the month of Iyar? Because you're coming to a time of revelation. You're coming to a time when the Torah is given at Sinai, coming to that moment. And as we know, like when we talk about the king in the field, you come to approach the throne, clean hands and a pure heart. You've got to be in a place where you're ready to receive, that you're not soiled, that he can trust you with the word he's going to give you. And it kind of brings up I don't know what the word is. It brings up an awareness of something in the word that I think that a lot of us don't tend to think about very much. Actually, to start, let's turn over to Leviticus chapter 13. We'll jump into this for a moment. Leviticus chapter 13 is not a chapter that I tend to read a lot of times in my Bible reading. I don't tend to spend a lot of time in Leviticus. But when you think of it, when little Hebrew boys are in their school, that's one of the first books that they memorize, is the book of Leviticus. And a lot of people in this time say that that's law, that's all passed away. It's not. Yeshua came to complete the Torah, not to do away with it. And he said that not a jot or tittle of the word would pass away. Did he not? So Leviticus chapter 13, we'll start at verse 1. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when a man has a swelling on his skin, a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes the disease of leprosy in his skin, then he shall be brought to the priest, to Aaron or one of his sons. The priest shall take a look at the diseased spot on his skin, and if the hair in it has turned white and the disease appears depressed and deeper than his skin, it is a leprous disease, and the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. If the bright spot is white on his skin, not depressed, and the hair on it not turned white, the priest shall quarantine the person or bind up the spot for 7 days, and the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And if the disease in his estimation is at a standstill and has not spread in the skin, then the priest shall quarantine the person, bind up the spot 7 more days. And the priest shall examine him again the 7th day, and if the diseased part has a more normal color and the disease has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only an eruption or a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the eruption or scab spreads further in the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. If the priest sees that the eruption or scab is spreading in the skin, then he shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the disease of leprosy is in a man, he shall be brought to a priest, and the priest shall examine him. And if there is a white swelling in the skin, and hair on it has turned white, and there's quick raw flesh in the swelling. Now, key in on that. There's raw flesh. We're going to get back to that in a moment. It is a chronic leprosy in the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not bind the spot up, for he is unclean. I'm not going to continue reading it. It just goes into more of the, and if the spot looks like this, and if the hair doesn't turn white, he goes through this whole, very detailed. Yahweh's very detailed about everything. I'm going to go back, we'll jump down to verse 44. He is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. And the leper's clothes shall be rent, and the hair of his head shall hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. Notice this? So if the man has leprosy, he's supposed to go around crying, unclean, unclean. It's not that everybody else around him is saying, you're unclean, this man's unclean. He is to come and say, I'm unclean. He's to announce that to everybody. Imagine the humility that took to go around and say that. We're going to get to the spiritual implication of that in a moment. He shall remain unclean as long as the disease is in him. He is unclean. He shall live alone, and his dwelling shall be outside the camp. The garment also of the disease that the disease of leprosy is in. So when they say about leprosy in the Bible, a lot of times it can be either on a person, in clothes, or in the house. So it says, the garment also of the disease of leprosy, Amplified says, symbolic of sin. Remember we talked about leaven being a symbol of sin last week? Leprosy is also a symbol of sin, and we'll get to the reason why. Is in whether a wool or linen garment, whether it be in woven or knitted stuff, or the warp or woof of linen or wool. I don't know what that means. What is a warp or woof? I haven't looked into that. I should have looked that up more. A warp or woof? It's weaving. Okay. Okay. Well, that explains it a little better. Like woof is what a dog does. Of linen or of wool, or in a skin, or anything made of skin. If the disease is greenish or reddish in the garment, it is the plague of leprosy. Show it to the priest. The priest shall examine the diseased article and shut it up for 7 days. So he goes through this whole thing on looking into it. And it ends up, if it's leprosy, they burn the garment, like you get rid of it completely. But if it's not spreading, it's not leprosy. Go back down to verse 59. This is the law for a leprous disease in the garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof, or in anything made of skin, to pronounce it clean or unclean. Then we get to chapter 14, and it says, and the Lord said to Moses, this shall be the law of the leper on the day when he is pronounced clean. He shall be brought to the priest at a meeting place outside the camp. The priest shall go out of the camp to meet him, and he shall examine him. And if the disease is healed in the leper, then the priest shall command to take for him, who is to be cleansed, 2 living kosher birds. It says clean birds, so that would be kosher birds. And cedar wood and scarlet material and hyssop. And the priest shall command to kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over fresh running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar wood, and the scarlet material, and the hyssop, and shall dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird killed over running water, and he shall sprinkle the blood on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy 7 times, and pronounce him clean, and let the living bird go into the open field. Goes into more that he has to offer sin sacrifices and all that type of stuff. But at first glance, you look at this and say, what in the world is this? You take the bird, you kill one bird, you dip the other bird into the blood of this bird, and then wrap it up with linen garments and cedar wood and hyssop, and you wave it before the Lord. For one, you can imagine what that little bird is thinking, like, what are you doing to me? But before we get into that, I'll jump back into talking more about what leprosy is, because it's a disease that a lot of people don't really know about. It's not really a common disease now, although there are still leper colonies in the world. But it was one of the most debilitating diseases in the ancient world. Nothing evoked more fear or dread than leprosy in the ancient world. I mean, it was like you were an outcast if you had leprosy and everything. The term leprosy occurs 68 times in the Bible, 55 times in the Old Testament and 13 times in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is sa'arath. In the New Testament, it's lepros or lepra, from which we get leper. In the Old Testament, the instances of leprosy meant a variety of infectious skin diseases and even mold and mildew on clothing and walls. Side note here, interesting that Yahweh takes mold so seriously because he knows that if it spreads, it's going to destroy whatever's around it. Very interesting. The precise meaning of leprosy in the Old and New Testament is still unknown, but it probably includes the modern Hansen's disease. Hansen's disease was given in 1873 when this guy had, Hansen, his name, he discovered the bacteria that's causing this disease. It didn't kill, but it didn't seem to end. So when this person had leprosy, it's not like within a year they're going to be dead, but it's going to start eating away at them from within, basically. Causes the tissues to degenerate and deforms the body. So, they don't look like themselves. Many have thought leprosy to be a disease of the skin. You seem to think, when it talks about the laws of leprosy, if it's on the skin and all that, but it doesn't start on the skin. It's better classified as a disease of the nervous system because the bacteria attacks the nerves. And this is the biggest reason why leprosy was so feared. It attacks the nerves. It starts in the skin, and then it goes and spreads to other parts of the body, the hands, face, feet, ears. People with leprosy experience disfigurement of skin and bones, twisting of the limbs, curling of the fingers to form a claw, facial changes, thickening of the ear, collapsing of the nose, so it completely warps them. Tumor-like growths can form, and the largest number of deformities develop from a loss of pain sensation. Now pick up on that. So somebody who has leprosy, it destroys their nerves, so they can't feel pain. So a lot of people tend to think of leprosy like their fingers will fall off. They won't necessarily fall off, but they do things, they can't feel the pain, they can't feel, like you can pick up a cup of boiling water and not even flinch because you don't feel that it's burning you. Sometimes pain can be a good thing because it will warn you not to do that, right? It protects your body. But they have no pain sensation, so it destroys all those nerve endings, and they tend to injure themselves and be unaware of it. So they end up having to have amputations and all this stuff go on. This is kind of gross, but some leprosy patients had their fingers eaten by rats while they were sleeping because they didn't even know it. It's really, really a gross, disgusting disease. The biggest example in the Bible of a man with leprosy is the man with the withered hand that Yeshua healed. That was leprosy. His hand was withered up. A person with any scaly skin was a leper. It extended to rot or blemish on leather, the walls of a house, and woven cloth. It goes through, like, they're recognized to be dangerous. These people are dangerous. They could spread because it was contagious. But it's meant to be a graphic picture of sin. When you look at how many times throughout the word it relates leprosy to sin. Even when he said to him, go and sin no more unless something worse happened to you. How many times do we see that Yeshua said that? Sin is ugly, it's loathsome, it's incurable, and it's contaminating. It separates men from God and makes them outcasts. I mean, that's the biggest thing that marked leprosy. You're an outcast. You have to live outside the camp. The instructions given to the priests in Leviticus 13 help us understand the nature of sin. Sin is inside us. It's deeper than the skin. So if it's just on skin level, it's not leprosy. Like, it's going to go away. It's just something that happened to your skin. But when it goes deeper than the skin, then that's when it's a danger because you can't just clean it away. This is where the article I was reading to her last night, I'm like, this gets interesting because it goes right back to what we were talking about last week. All these people who were lepers were recognized to be dangerous and damaging. And leprosy was a serious threat not only to the individual, but to the whole people, the whole camp of Israel. When we talked about our actions don't just affect us, it affects everybody around us. And they had to be detected. The process of detection was prolonged and had a careful inspection. At the end of the time of the inspection, the priest could determine whether it was leprosy or something less serious. All of this has a counterpart in our own spiritual lives. This passage is talking to us about the afflictions and diseases of the spirit, hurtful attitudes we have, burning resentments, feelings of anger that we go through, and grudges that we carry around in our hearts toward one another. These are to be detected because they are very dangerous, and the process is to expose them to a priest. You see that? You have to go to a priest. You can't determine in yourself whether you have it or not. Go and expose yourself to a priest. Remember now in the New Testament, believers are priests together. We're priests together. So this article says, you see, we are all blind to ourselves. In my own eyes, I'm a very genial, gracious, inoffensive person. I get along with everybody and have the warmest feelings toward everyone. I don't know why it is, but they don't always seem to feel the same way or see me the same way. My own family tells me that there are times when I am not that way at all. I find myself very blind to my own failings. So the thing with leprosy is they would walk around, a lot of these people would have an odor to them from the flesh that was decaying or whatever. But they couldn't smell their own odor. Somebody else walking up would be like, oh, wow, that man stinks. But you wouldn't necessarily smell it on yourself. You see the spiritual implication I'm painting here. We all have these blind spots. We rarely detect these things ourselves. That's why we need each other. It's like what she was saying last week, that we're not the best judges of ourselves. We're not the best ones to see what's going on inside of ourselves. Other people on the outside can see better. The procedure the priest used was not that of impulsive judgment. He didn't just snap his fingers and say, oh, I know what you have. You've got measles, you got mosquito bites, or you got leprosy. It was a very involved process. He watched the development for 7 days. Interesting, 7 being the number of perfection. And he understood the nature of it, and only then did he make his pronouncement. So it's not just like you walk up to somebody and say, you have this challenge in your life. You know, especially if it's not somebody that you really know very well, you don't really know what's going on in their life, not recommended to do that. But what the priest was especially concerned about was to detect leprosy. That in the spiritual realm, it affects others within the body of believers. It's not just limited to that one person. And if they continue going around within the camp, they're going to infect others. A bitter spirit can be as contagious as smallpox. And a lot of times we don't see that. We don't see these negative attitudes we have within ourselves as being contagious. We don't see them as being dangerous as a disease. This is the picture that Yahweh's trying to get through to them. The way he's treating leprosy is the same way he wants you to treat sin in your life. Treat it as much as if it's a deadly cancer that's going to eat away at your life. I mean, if you found that, say it was in these people's houses, the mold on the house, they were supposed to, it gets into it more in Leviticus, that they were supposed to actually go into the house, find out, okay, there's a spot of mold on the wall. We're supposed to go in and take that stone out from the wall and go and bring it outside the city to an unclean place. Then they had to go back in with a scraper and scrape off all the plaster of the stones around it and replaster the wall and then watch it again to make sure that there wasn't more spots that appeared. They took it so seriously. And what do we know, even just in the natural? We listen to Doug Kaufman, and when he talks about mold and fungus being the cause of so many diseases, you know, there's an underlying root, you know, of all sins. Like she was saying about pride being the root of all sins. We've got to make sure there's not even a spot of it, because it will spread. It won't just stay in that one cell inside of you. It spreads, so you got to get it out and deal with it to its fullest extent. A rebellious attitude can spread like an epidemic and turn everybody against each other and against the Lord's authority. If this occurs, then the one who began it is obviously afflicted with a leprous disease and is unclean in God's sight. This disease is dangerous, unharmful to the individual and to the body in which he lives, the body being his church family. In Luke 17, there's the account of 10 lepers that came to Yeshua and asked for help. He told them to go and show themselves to the priest. As they went their way, the leprosy turned white, and they knew they were cleansed. Because that's the thing. If they turn completely white, it's not spreading anymore, they're cleansed. This is a beautiful picture for us how to handle leprosy. When what had been leprous turned white, then even though the whole body was covered from head to foot, the priest pronounced the person clean. The turning of the leprosy to white meant that the evil of it was arrested, that its action was stopped, and that the person was cleansed. You know, the leprosy isn't like something else that let's take it in the line of sin. So let's say gossip or you know, a sin that you're spreading evil words about somebody. It's like when we use that example of take a feather pillow and release all the feathers out into the air, and now go collect every single feather. It's impossible to go back and collect every feather that was released from that pillow. You can't stop negative words once they're spoken, because they're going to continue to spread. Those words are going to continue to spread. How many have seen like rumors that started online about somebody, and then suddenly their entire reputation is destroyed, and it wasn't even true, but it spread. It kept spreading, and it's impossible to go back and contact all those people that it spread to and tell them it wasn't true. It's impossible once it's spread. It's not like something that, okay, say you stole something or you lied. That action stops right afterwards. It doesn't continue going. It's that you did it, that's it. Doesn't tend to affect and keep going on. But that's why he treats Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, so seriously in the Bible. We'll get more into that. In order for Yahweh's grace to be effective, we must stop being defensive about our sins, stop excusing them. You know how easy it is to excuse them. We say, oh, I can't help it. Our whole family has been like this for generations. It's just because we're Irish. Or Italian, or German, or whatever. You know, a lot of people relegate it to, that's my personality because of that, and there's nothing I can do about it. There's no way I can stop it, it's just the way I am, don't expect me to change. How many people say that? All these excuses are fences we are building around our leprous disease to protect it and keep it and persist in it. It is that desire to hang on to these hurtful, injurious attitudes which marks the fallen Adamic nature within us. Isn't it strange that we cling so tenaciously to those things that hurt us so badly and hurt the ones we love? We hate to give them up. The pride of our hearts is such that we resist every attempt to help us, and we are critical and cold and spiteful and hateful in response to those who try to point them out to us. What a revelation this is of the fact that it is a kind of leprosy working in our lives. I mean, the seriousness of this. Think about our behavior and its consequences. How would we act differently if we knew that our sins could come back to us in the form of a rash on our skin or mold growing in our homes? If you knew that, okay, I sinned, I did this thing that was wrong, and it's going to come back in the form of something eating away at your skin or mold in your home, would you treat it a little bit differently? You know, I think so many times we etherealize sin or our actions and don't really put a concrete consequence to them. We don't see that there's something that is attached to that. But in the Bible, leprosy was seen as a punishment for sin, which is kind of interesting. So the Talmud and the majority of historic Jewish literature regards it and lists 7 possible causes for leprosy. Number 1, an evil tongue or malicious gossip, murder, a vain oath, immorality, pride, theft, and miserly behavior. Now, interesting, what does that sound like? Proverbs, when it talks about these 7 things are an abomination to the Lord, hands that shed innocent blood, a lying tongue, those who spread discord among their brethren, it lines up with what they say. They're called the 7 deadly sins. It's sins that go deeper because what it does is it hurts somebody else. It's not just going to affect you, but it's going to hurt other people. Real quick, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 15. And when you start seeing how much he relates things to leprosy, it starts opening up a bunch of scriptures to see what he really means by them. So Matthew 15, and we'll go down to verse 18. But whatever comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and this is what makes a man unclean and defiles him. That sound like the laws concerning leprosy? It's not just on the skin, it comes from within him. It's attacking from within out. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, such as murder, adultery, sexual vice, theft, false witnessing, slander, and irreverent speech. Those are the exact things that the rabbis all teach are the 7 sins that can bring leprosy upon somebody. I mean, you start seeing this. Yeshua was a rabbi. He would have known that was what was taught. He would have known that that's in the Word, in Proverbs and elsewhere, and that's exactly what he said. These are what make a man unclean and defile him. See, unclean. What did the man who had leprosy have to do? He had to go around saying, "I'm unclean, unclean." These are what make a man unclean. Very interesting. Like I said, I didn't see this until I started listening to this teaching about leprosy. And again, it's not something that we tend to focus a lot on. I've never really done a study on leprosy myself, to be honest. Just never was something that I focused on. But when you start seeing how much it was mentioned in the Word and how seriously it was taken, and then all these things that are connected to it. So when they say that these are possible causes of leprosy in an individual, so when they saw somebody who was leprous, they knew that he had a life full of sin. It was opening the door. It wasn't that God was striking him because he was angry with him. It was the consequences for his sin. He opened the door for this disease to come upon him. I think in so many cases we'll find that even the attacks of the enemy on our lives are because of things that we've opened the door with. Like, the enemy should not be able to get a shot into us. If we're clothed in the armor of God, if we're covered by the blood of the Lamb, that destroyer should not be able to touch us. Leprosy was like a living death. It was literally like these people were like the walking dead. They were walking around, but they were dying inside. But, it's amazing when you start to see Yeshua's connection to it. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into this in a moment. But just like the leper would have the disease long before it began to show. So it's like he's carrying it, but it wouldn't show on the skin yet. Sin does its work in us well before others may ever see it. It's already at work inside of us. It often starts with secret sins where only we will feel the tenderness. Then it begins to show itself in public sin. Then when we defend and justify our sin, it starts to fester and putrefy, but it all starts from within. So that's why he said so much about guard your heart, for out of your heart flow the issues of life. So much of it, again, you see the concept of it's coming from within out. And it's not from out inward. I'm trying to find this other part that I had. So the leprous person could not cure themselves. That was a big key of it. They couldn't cure themselves. During biblical times, there was no natural remedy, no diet. There was no ointments that could touch the depths of this disease. It's not a surface issue, and they couldn't cure it. The lack of a cure, however, did not mean that people were not cleansed of the disease. Think of Miriam. Remember Miriam? And what was the reason why she was struck with leprosy? Because she was criticizing Moses for marrying an Ethiopian woman. I mean, she had no business coming against the man of God at the time for who he married, So because she stepped out of that place, and again, Lashon Hara, that's one of these ones that said, the evil tongue, malicious gossip. Because of that, her flesh was stricken with leprosy. She only had it for a short time, and then Moses interceded, and she was cleansed. Think of Naaman. Go wash 7 times in the Jordan. He was cleansed of the disease. So what is impossible with men is possible with God. It was not a disease that any doctor could cure. Only God could. When you start seeing that, it kind of opens up to you the fact of what our sin is. We can't cure ourselves of our sin. We could never do enough to rid ourselves of sin, never do enough to earn salvation, never do enough to make ourselves not an outcast outside of the camp. But he could. So what you notice in this is there's a difference between healing and forgiveness, and cleansing. I think it's, let me look at this scripture real quick. I think it's John. John chapter 5, verse 12 says, while Yeshua was in one of the towns, there came a man full of leprosy. You see that? He's full of leprosy. It wasn't just in the beginning stages. And when he saw Yeshua, he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you are able to cure me and make me clean. Notice he didn't use the word heal. He said make clean, cleanse. This is a deeper than just healing. You need a cleansing. There's a difference between healing. So let's say, switch it over into a spiritual realm for a moment. Let's say that you have hurt somebody. I think Dad had talked about this. So you go and drop a brick on somebody's foot, and you ask them for forgiveness. And even if they say they forgive you, there's still the mark of it on them. The pain is still there in them. So they might forgive you, and there might be healing, but there needs to be a complete removal as if you never did that action. And that's the part that only Yahweh can do. Because there were occurrences, like it said in Leviticus chapter 13, that once their skin turned completely white, they were clean, but the disease was still in them. It wasn't completely gone out of them. So when this leper is saying to Yeshua, you are able to cure me and make me clean. In verse 13, it says, and Yeshua reached out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Didn't say be healed. In so many cases, he uses that. He says be healed. In this case, he says be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. And then what did Yeshua tell him? Yeshua charged him to tell no one until you go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your purification as Moses commanded, for a testimony and proof to the people that they may have evidence of your healing. Amazing. So Yeshua is pointing them right back at, go show yourself to the priest. This is what they said to do. But this man was cleansed. That was an impossibility in that day and age. Impossible situation that Yeshua healed like that. But when you start going into what were the laws of the purification, like we were talking about with the bird, taking the two birds and this whole thing where you kill one bird and you dip the other one. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, so the Kohen, the priest, shall command, take for the person undergoing purification 2 live kosher birds, cedar wood, red fabric, and hyssop. Spring water is placed into an earthenware vessel over which one of the birds is slaughtered and into which the blood is allowed to run. So you've got the blood and the water running together into this vessel. The Kohen dips the remaining bird and the other items into the water and the blood and sprinkles the man coming for purification 7 times on the back of the hand. Some say that the sprinkling was done onto his hand or onto his forehead. The identical procedure was performed for a house struck by leprosy. Once they were cleansing it, they would do the same thing, the sprinkling being done on the lintel. What does that remind you of? Passover. The slaughtered bird was buried in the presence of the man who was coming for cleansing, and the live bird was freed into the open field. So this is where we get to a parallel that's very interesting. Another one that I didn't know about. But you picture Yeshua, who he was. We talk about he's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world and everything. But if you start to parallel the laws of the purification here, Yeshua is the bird who died. He's the one who, his blood was sacrificed, his blood was shed for this person who had leprosy. He was nailed to a cedar beam. Think of it. You got the bird, you got the cedar wood. The red or purple linen, he was wrapped with that scarlet robe, remember that? and he was offered vinegar on a hyssop branch. I mean, how specific was Yahweh? You know, it could have been any other branch that was offered to him. It was a hyssop branch that was offered to him, which is very interesting. Do you have that part on the hyssop?
I do. So, on hyssop, when we were talking about last night, it was just really interesting. I just wanted to add a little side note into what Jordan was talking about when she was talking about the mold and sin and everything. You know, with mold, and I think she started to touch on this, mold can be visible. It can be seen, but it also can be invisible. Mm-hmm. It can be not seen. So, you know, like if you have I remember one time, I don't know who it was I was with, but we had a strawberry, and on the tip part of the strawberry was all molded, had mold all over it. And the person had said to me, well, just cut off the tip. The rest of it is okay. It's like, actually, it's not. Because if you know anything about mold, it is visible on the top, but mold has like arms. It has little strands, little like octopus legs, veins that infiltrate into the rest of the fruit. So you can't just cut off that section of the fruit and think the mold's gone, the rest of the fruit is fine, you can eat it. That whole piece of fruit has been contaminated. That's right. It's been contaminated by that mold. So just like with sin, there's sin that's visible, but there's sin that's invisible. And the sin that's invisible is the sin that you haven't dealt with. And like Jordan was saying, the longer, you know, you're doing something and and we talked about last week, the longer you just let it sit there and it kind of like ferments and it kind of grows these little octopus legs and these little veins and stuff, and it goes throughout your body. And it's a whole thing of infiltrating from the inside out. Just like with a piece of fruit. If you let that mold, what happens when you take you have a strawberry with a piece of mold on it and you just let it sit there? That mold just doesn't stay in that one spot. It eventually takes over the entire strawberry.
And it will decompose. See, that's another sign, like we were talking about leaven being a sign of death at work. There would be no leaven if there wasn't a curse on the earth. There would be no leprosy if there wasn't a curse on the earth. There would be no mold if there wasn't a curse on the earth. It all has to do with decay and death and something decomposing and dying.
Exactly. And it's all in the hidden way that it works. So, you know, like I said, you have that piece of fruit, and it may have just started out with that one little piece of mold in it, but left unattended, it will eventually just take over that entire piece of fruit. And like she said, it will just decompose, and what happens? It starts to shrivel up. It starts to it's getting the mold is sucking the very life out of it. Sucking the very life out of it, just like what sin does. And that's what we've been talking about. If left untreated, if left unrepented, that sin will just start to suck the very life out of you. And it's interesting, you know, and it's mold in any type of aspect. It does not matter what the host is, so to speak. If the mold is on a piece of strawberry or if the mold is on any type of food. You know, for example, you know, I had bought a container of hummus. I had gone grocery shopping on Wednesday night. I bought a container of hummus for Australia for lunch. And Thursday, I pulled off the lid to give it to her for lunch, and there was this big thing of mold sitting right on the top of it on the corner. And now some people think, oh, you could just scoop that section out and throw it out. But no, that mold had already started to infiltrate its way through the rest of the hummus. But it does not matter what the object is for mold to grab a hold of. So it does not matter what the object is for sin to grab a hold of. Sin plays no respecter of persons, at all. So whether you're male, female, child, adult, no one's immune to sin. It doesn't matter who you are, somebody poor and on the streets or some high-class, wealthy individual, you know, CEO of a company. Sin can infiltrate and come upon anyone of any type. And so interesting. It was just as you were talking about that. It was just like downloading in me, you know, just to take the seriousness of everything that we've been talking about and seeing all the connections, the spiritual connections of it. So, anyways, back to hyssop. So the Bible mentions hyssop several times, mostly in the Old Testament. In Leviticus, God commanded his people to use, Jordan touched on this, his people to use hyssop in the ceremonial cleansing of people and houses. In one example, God tells the priest to use hyssop together with cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and the blood of a clean bird to sprinkle a person recently healed from a skin disease. This act would ceremonially cleanse the formerly diseased person and allow him to re-enter the camp. The same method was used to purify a house that had previously contained mold. Interesting, too, in the aspect of a house, a lot of times they tell you that if you have a house that's gotten mold into it, with the way the mold works and the way it infiltrates and is visible and stuff, a lot of times that section where the mold is, they tell you to take down that whole section of the house.
That's exactly what it says in Leviticus. If there was a part of mold in your house, you got to take the stones of the wall. Not just take the plaster off, but take the stones out and take them out.
Take them out.
Take them out.
Hyssop is also used symbolically in the Bible. When the Israelites marked their doorposts with lamb's blood in order for the angel of death to pass over them, God instructed them to use a bunch of hyssop as a paintbrush. This was probably because hyssop was sturdy and could withstand the brushing, but it also likely signified that God was marking his people as pure and not targets of the judgment God was about to deal out to the Egyptians. I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but back when the virus had first started and we were talking about applying the blood to the doorposts of our homes and our workplaces and all that stuff, and Mom had this illustration or a picture when she was talking about then apply the blood to the doorposts of your body. And she was talking, do you guys recall this? This was the lintel, you remember the forehead?
Yes.
And then the frame posts of your body, applying it that way. I recalled that when it reminded me of that when Jordan was talking about that, applying the blood to the doorposts of our body. That's the same symbol of the doorposts of our home. Our forehead was the lintel, our arms were the side posts of the house, and applying the blood to us. David also mentions hyssop in Psalm 51:7. Cleanse me with hyssop and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. David does not refer to physical cleansing, rather, he is asking God to cleanse him spiritually as he confesses his sin.
And you see the relation between that and the leprosy, like they were talking about. When the leper was completely white, he was cleansed of the disease. Again, these people would have been very aware of the Levitical laws and of their implications in their own life. Like how do we apply this in our own life? How do we make sure that this is, like he's saying, cleanse me and I'll be whiter than snow?
Hyssop also appears at Yeshua's crucifixion when the Roman soldiers offered Yeshua a drink of wine vinegar on a sponge at the end of a stalk of hyssop. This was, in fact, Yeshua's last act before he declared his work on earth finished and gave up his spirit. While the hyssop stalk may have been used for purely practical purposes, it was long enough to reach Yeshua's mouth as he hung on the cross. It is interesting that that particular plant was chosen. It is possible that God meant this as a picture of purification, as Yeshua bought our forgiveness with his sacrifice. Just as in the Old Testament blood and hyssop purified a defiled person, so Yeshua's shed blood purifies us from the defilement of our sin. So when we looked more into hyssop and saw some things about it, hyssop, when used, was used to purge. And purge means to rid of something. So it was used to purge yourself, to rid of something. And the example that they gave was to rid of wrong thoughts, to rid of sins, to rid of old habits, bad habits. It was meant to purge you of anything that was not right. That kind of like to purge you from your wrong purpose to your right purpose. Hyssop also was used in the manner of to have a path of restoration, freedom, and forgiveness. All that tied just to hyssop. You know, and it's amazing. If you start to look at different things in the Bible, just don't look at it like as this whole picture. You know, I read the Bible and, oh, he did this with the almond tree. Well, the almond tree is significant for a reason. There's something behind the
There's
almond tree.
significance behind everything
And all
that
the
he
things
says.
in there. So
If it's written in the Word, it's because it's significant, because there's something behind it.
you know, the grapes or whatever. Go into the deeper meaning to see what it actually means and how it's applied when it's being used at that time. So like this with hyssop, it's to restore, to bring freedom, and to forgive. Well, what did Yeshua do for us? He restored us. He brought us freedom, but he brought us forgiveness. He did all of that, and it was all, and no coincidence, okay, that they put that vinegar on that hyssop branch to give him that drink.
It was the completion
Okay.
of the picture. And everybody who was there would have known the rituals of the purification. And by the way, after he died, what did they do? They pierced his side, and what came out? Blood and water. It's the exact image of this purification of the lepers. So in essence, when Yeshua's up there on the cross, he's declaring that we're all lepers outside the camp. But he took that for us, for our cleansing. Ephesians 2, verse 1 through 2 verse 12, says, remember that at that time you were separated from Messiah, excluded from all part in him, utterly estranged and outlawed from the rights of Israel as a nation, and strangers with no share in the sacred compacts of the promise. And you had no hope. You were in the world without God. You hear that picture? We're outside the camp. That's who we were. We were the lepers outside the camp. But Yeshua is the one who came to cleanse the lepers. He came, that's why his biggest ministry here on earth, how many times do we see the pictures of him cleansing the lepers and touching the people with leprosy? In the natural, when you touch somebody with leprosy, you became unclean. But he touched them and cleansed them. Now, interesting with that man who had the leprosy that I was reading about in John, what did he tell him? Don't tell anybody about this, but just go and show yourself to the priest. Man goes and starts spreading the fame of him all around. Yeshua's not able to go into the city anymore, so he had to go to an outside place to preach to them. He switched places with that man. That man was a leper. He would have been outside the city. He would have been an outcast. He would have had to stay outside of the city. But Yeshua came and said, I'm taking your leprosy, and now he's the one on the outside. You see that? How many times there's that picture? And when John was asking, when he was in prison, and he was asking, is he the one who's coming, or is there somebody else? And he said, go and tell him this, that the lepers are cleansed, that the dead are raised, and all that. But he made how many people did he heal? Of all different diseases. Multitudes came to him to be healed, and they were all healed. But he specifically picked out this one. The lepers are cleansed, because that's an impossible thing to do. By the way, very interesting to note, in the Babylonian Talmud, it is written, the Messiah, what is his name? The rabbis say he's called the leper scholar. Now, they're not thinking that they're referring to Yeshua, but they say he's called the leper scholar, as it is said in Isaiah, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of God and afflicted. Now, when I first thought that, I'm like, esteemed him a leper. When you go back to Isaiah 53, I'm just going to look that real quick in the Amplified. Isaiah 53, when it talks about that in verse 4, Isaiah 53:4, it says, surely he has borne our griefs, sicknesses, weaknesses, and distresses, and carried our sorrows and pains of punishment. Yet we ignorantly considered him stricken, smitten, and afflicted by God as if with leprosy. I never saw that until I started reading this. Babylonian Talmud is the one that said we did esteem him a leper. So the translators of the Amplified Bible picked up on that's what that word meant. He was stricken, smitten, afflicted by God, because that's what, if they saw somebody with leprosy, they were stricken by God. They were afflicted by God because of their sin. So when those people were looking at him on the cross, they're seeing him as being a leper. He's somebody that was, not the Son of God. He was somebody who was like the worst of sinners. What does it say? That he was disfigured beyond recognition, that nobody even saw that he was a man. That's leprosy. How many times do you see that? It's just the imagery is all there. That's what he bore. He bore the very curse of the law for the people who sinned. He bore it in his body. That's what he took on himself. But the fact that they call him the leper scholar in the Talmud, I found was very interesting.
And like Jordan was just saying, and why did he do that? You know, just like the whole thing symbolic within the hyssop, why did he do that? He did that to restore, to bring freedom, and to bring forgiveness. Mm-hmm. You know, he had any choice at that moment. You know, when he was, you know, had that choice in the garden and stuff, and on the cross and everything, he had that one split choice where he did not have to do what he chose to do for us. Mm-hmm. You know, he did not have to do it. Right. He could have just been over here on the outside and been like, you know, hallelujah. Yeah. But he didn't. Yeah. And you see all the connections to everything. And it all comes back down to being restored, to be given freedom, and to have forgiveness. Mm-hmm. You know, just like the thing with the applying of when they were told to put the blood on the doorposts, you know, when the destroyer of death was going to come. What did that blood do applied with the hyssop? What did it do? It brought them restoration and freedom from what the enemy was going to do. I'm going to mark the doorpost with the blood, and I see that and pass over you. And when I pass over you, that is where you will have your restoration and your freedom from anything that you've done. And forgiveness.
And Amen. Forgiveness. And that's exactly what that generation of the Israelites were meant to have. They were meant to have that and walk out the fullness of their being redeemed from Egypt. However, what they had within them, this grumbling, complaining spirit, it was like a leprosy that was in the camp. You see that? That's why that generation never ended up being able to go into the promised land. It ended up being only their children that were able to enter in. It was never Yahweh's intention for that generation to die in the wilderness. It was never his intention for them to wander in the desert for 40 years. They were meant to, they're on their way to Mount Sinai. They camped at Mount Sinai for a year. On the day which they left Mount Sinai, they were supposed to go right from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. It would have been an 11-day journey. But this incident happens with the spies, and they say, we're not able to go in and take the land, and now you have to turn back and wander in the desert. I mean, so that was not meant to be their journey, but it was at the point where he knew, okay, it's more than skin deep. This complaining attitude inside of them, this not trusting me after time after time after time of showing his faithfulness, he knew it's not able to be rooted out of this people. You're going to have to wander in the desert and die in the desert, and then your children will come in and possess the land because that leprosy is not in them. They're going to be kept clean from that. So he takes this seriously because it is serious. It would have hindered them even more once they entered into the promised land. It would have been something that would have prevented them from being able to walk in the fullness of the blessing that he had destined for them. It would have been everything that they encountered. It would have been, oh, well, why'd he bring us into this land now? And you know, that was their deep-rooted attitude that they weren't cleansed from. But the interesting thing is you fast forward through the days in the desert. Moses dies. Joshua picks up. You have Joshua 1 where he said, I've commanded you to be strong and courageous and go and possess the land. You come to Joshua chapter 5, and you have this event where they're circumcising all the men, because when they were wandering in the desert, all those years, the 40 years, the men were all uncircumcised. So it's like, all right, before we enter this promised land, we have to come to this time of circumcision, which is a sign of the covenant. You're coming into covenant. You're going to be my people. Joshua 5:6 says, for the Israelites walked 40 years in the wilderness till all who were men of war who came out of Egypt perished because they did not hearken to the voice of the Lord. To them the Lord swore that he would not let them see the land which the Lord swore to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their uncircumcised children whom he raised up in their stead. Now, interesting. It was their uncircumcised children that he raised up. So they're basically a clean slate. They're not even in the covenant at this point because they're not circumcised. That was the sign of the covenant. Whom Joshua circumcised because the rite had not been performed on the way. When they finished circumcising all the males of the nation, they remained in their places in the camp till they were healed. And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. But it was 40 years earlier that they left Egypt. Took 40 years for the reproach of Egypt, that last defiling aspect of Egypt that was holding them as slaves, even in the desert. It wasn't until 40 years later that he said, I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. That was a cleansing time. They came through this time of cleansing before they could go into Jericho. And then the next verse says, and the Israelites encamped in Gilgal, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at the evening in the plains of Jericho. Interesting. So you come to this season that we just came through, Passover. They're camping on the plains of Jericho at Passover, remembering that first Passover and following all the commandments. That day, the manna ceased when they ate the produce of the land. So on that day, no more manna, because now you're going to be living off of the land here. And then you come on to the whole story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho and everything. Today on the Hebrew calendar is when the walls of Jericho fell. So you have this timeline that they followed. They're circumcised, the reproach of Egypt is rolled off of them, they keep the Passover, and now they can go in and possess the land. It's following the same pattern as the first generation. It's like, all right, now we're going to redo this and try again and rewrite it, like she said, giving you a second chance. It's like that second Passover of Iyar. It's that second Passover. I'm going to give you another chance to keep this and now go in and possess the land. And they did it. They went in, they took Jericho, they entered the land, and the walls fell down. Interesting, because that when I was reading that thing about leprosy, the biggest thing that you build around yourself when you're trying to defend your position is a wall. But it's time for the breaking down of those walls. It's time for breaking down of all the defenses that we've been putting around ourselves that are keeping us stuck in the same old place. You know, those walls were meant to fall 40 years before that. But the first generation could not see beyond the walls. They couldn't see those walls falling down. They could not see a life beyond what they had. They were stuck in that same old place. They were stuck behind their own walls, and it prevented them from going out and breaking down other walls. But here we go. Here we have it. This generation came in, took possession of the land. The reproach of Egypt is rolled off of them. They're cleansed. They have a new life, a new beginning. Like we talk about, this is a time of new beginnings. And it's just that picture of a leper. You think of it. When Yeshua cleansed the leper, that man had his life back. You think of, we just read these stories like, oh yeah, he cleansed the leper, great, he was healed. No, that man was now able to go back and live in the city. He could go back to his family. Maybe he had a wife that he had to leave because he had leprosy. He could go back and have a job. He could make something of his life. Now, he literally had a new life handed to him now that he was cleansed from the leprosy. It was a new beginning for him. And all because he dealt with the root of it and all the things that went along with that disease. When it was cleansed, it was gone completely, like it never even existed in his body. And in some cases, when Yeshua it talks about they were healed and cleansed. Well, the healing had to do with their physical body. You think of what the marks that leprosy left in the body, that even once they were cleansed, they still might have had fingers and toes missing and part of an ear missing or something. They were healed completely, like it never even existed in that body. The mark of it was completely gone. And that's what Yeshua came to do with us. With the sin, with everything in our lives, he came to make it as if it never even existed. But in saying that, we should never take sin lightly. If the Bible treats it as such a serious thing that it's like leprosy, then we need to treat it as just as serious. How many is it in the Gospels where Yeshua says that men will give account of every idle word they speak of on the day of judgment? That's the one thing that you don't see that in the Bible anywhere. It indicates that what you say is wiped out. You can't go back and reclaim those words. You can rewrite them, you can restore things, going forward. But we need to be very careful of what we say with our mouths. Because that's where it says that all your works and what you've said and things will be burned up in the end, and what's gold will remain. we got to take that very seriously. And it should make us think twice about what we say. If we're going to, whether it be towards somebody that we know, or whether it be when we're driving down the road and somebody cuts us off in traffic and we think the thought. I mean, how many times did Yeshua take it down to the matter of the heart? If you even think this, then you've done it. So if we even think toward that person, whatever we might not have even uttered with our mouth, then it's still as if we're saying the wrong things. So we got to take thoughts captive. We got to watch our mouth. We got to watch the words of our mouth. We got to make sure that we are judging within ourselves and not trying to defend whatever might be hidden within ourselves. And if somebody else points it out to us, then we got to trust that they see things that we can't see in ourselves because we have our blind spots. It's like, I want you to see in my blind spot. What is it that I need to change? What is it that I need to correct? What is it that I need restoration in? And so many times that goes back to relationships, like what we were talking about last week. If there's been a hurt or something in a relationship, if you don't guard it, it's going to create a numbness that you're not going to even feel in that area anymore. You've got to be able to remove it completely from that relationship so that it's like it never even existed, so that you can have not just a healing but a cleansing of that area and have complete restoration. And that's all wrapped up in this month. Didn't know all that stuff was wrapped up in this month, huh? But when you start looking into it, there's a reason why Yahweh has the pattern that he has in the Word. There's a reason why he says the things that he does. There's a reason why there's the pattern of the months. And if we can step into it, he said, I am Yahweh Rapha. I am the Lord who heals you. And that goes into every area of life. So whatever area of your life that you need healing, that you need cleansing, just reach out and take it. Step into that. And let him roll the reproach of Egypt off of you. Let him remove those old filthy rags of your former life off of you. Amen? You have anything else? Well, we thank you for joining us today. We trust that you've learned something today and you've gotten something out of this message. We will be back here on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. And until then, you have a blessed week.